We trust our eyes because seeing feels direct. But what if perception is less like a camera and more like a filter that hides as much as it reveals? Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
It is honestly a terrifying premise when you really stop to think about it.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, we navigate our entire lives based on this assumption that our conscious experience is just, a one-to-one reflection of reality.
Yeah.
But the science tells a very different story.
Exactly. And that is why today we are doing a deep dive into a fundamentally paradigm-shifting book called The Invisible Gorilla by cognitive psychologists Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons.
Such an important book.
Oh, absolutely. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore a central cognitive system failure. We are looking at the fact that people routinely, almost constantly, overestimate how much they notice.
Right. And how accurately they remember things.
Yes, and how deeply they actually understand the world around them. We are talking about the gap between how perception feels to you and me and how perception actually works.
And the overarching theme we really need to unpack to make sense of this is the profound structural tension between efficiency and awareness.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, we like to think of the human brain as this absolute marvel of engineering, which, it is. But it is fundamentally not designed to absorb everything in view.
It just doesn't have the capacity.
Exactly. It simply doesn't have the processing power.
Yeah.
Instead, it's designed to prioritize selected signals while ruthlessly filtering out competing information.
So it's actively ignoring things.
Yes. That filtering mechanism is what makes action possible in a complex, chaotic world. But the trade-off is severe. It creates a literal blindness to unexpected events, even when they are seemingly obvious.
Right. And as we're going to see today, this isn't just about quirky mind tricks.
No, not at all.
Like if it were just optical illusions you stare at on a computer screen, it would just be a fun parlor game, but it's not.
The stakes here are incredibly high because we are talking about massive systemic issues.
Oh, for sure.
Think about it. Our legal systems, our transportation networks, our medical procedures, and even our public discourse are all built on a fundamentally flawed, overly optimistic model of human perception.
We basically build our societies on the assumption that if you are looking directly at something, you see it.
Right. We assume that if you remember something vividly and with high emotion, it definitely happened exactly that way.
But as the data Chabris and Simons present clearly shows, those assumptions are dangerously incorrect.
Dangerously is the right word.
I promise you, if you are listening to this right now, by the end of this deep dive, you are going to have X-ray vision into the tiny gears and pulleys governing your own thoughts.
It will definitely change how you view your own mind.
It's going to help you avoid dangerous assumptions in your daily life. And to get there, we have to start with the namesake of the book, the famous gorilla experiment.
The absolute classic.
I know it's a classic, but we really need to break down the mechanics of it. If you haven't seen this video, let me paint the picture for you.
Go for it.
The researchers set up a camera in a hallway, and they have two teams of students. One team is wearing white shirts. The other team is wearing black shirts.
Right.
They are moving around in a tight circle, passing basketballs. Your task, as the viewer, is to silently count the number of passes made only by the players wearing white.
And to make it even harder, you have to keep separate mental counts of the aerial passes and the bounce passes.
Which is key to the experiment's design.
Oh, absolutely. It is a highly demanding task. It requires focused visual attention and continuous engagement of your working memory.
You're juggling a lot of data.
You are. You have to track the white shirts, actively ignore the black shirts, watch the ball, categorize the trajectory of the ball as aerial or bounce, and constantly update two separate numbers in your head.
So your cognitive load is totally maxed out?
Maxed out. You have zero spare processing power.
So you're watching this minute-long video, counting the passes. 1, 2, bounce pass, that's 3, another aerial pass, 4. And about halfway through, a female student wearing a full-body gorilla suit walks right into the middle of the players.
Right into the center.
She stops in the center of the action, turns to face the camera, thumps her chest, and slowly walks off screen. She's in the frame for a solid 9 seconds.
A long time in video terms.
A very long time. At the end of the video, the researchers asked the viewers, did you notice anything unusual? And the results are staggering. Roughly half of all subjects completely miss the gorilla.
Half.
Half of the people.
What is truly fascinating about this isn't just the statistical failure rate. It's the absolute shock, and honestly sometimes anger, of the people who miss it.
I would be so mad.
They get defensive. When they are shown the video a second time without the counting task, The gorilla is painfully obvious. It dominates the screen.
So they think they're being tricked.
Yes, some subjects literally accuse the researchers of switching the tape or playing a trick on them. They cannot reconcile their subjective experience with the objective reality.
Because their subjective experience felt like full, rich, continuous visual awareness of the scene.
Exactly. They can't believe they missed a giant primate thumping its chest in the direct middle of their field of view. This introduces us to the scientific concept of inattentional blindness.
And we need to clarify the biology here for a second, because my first instinct when I hear about this is to think, well, maybe their eyes just didn't sweep over that part of the screen.
That's what most people assume.
But this is not a visual defect, is it? Their eyes are working perfectly fine.
Precisely. In fact, researchers have run this exact experiment while subjects were hooked up to advanced eye-tracking equipment.
Oh, wow. So they know exactly where they looked.
Yes. The data shows that the people who missed the gorilla often looked directly at it. Their foveal vision, the sharpest center of human sight, rested right on the gorilla's face for a full second.
So the eye literally saw it.
The light bounced off the gorilla, entered their corneas, hit their retinas, and the optic nerve sent the signal to the brain. The eye saw it, but the brain threw the data away.
How? Why would the brain throw away a gorilla?
Because of how cognitive resources are allocated. Inattentional blindness occurs when attention is devoted to a specific demanding task.
Right.
Attention is a limited resource. William James, the father of American psychology, described it as a zero-sum game.
Meaning if you spend it somewhere, you lose it somewhere else.
Exactly. When you allocate all your available processing power to tracking white shirts and bouncing basketballs, your prefrontal cortex sends a signal to your visual cortex to aggressively filter out unexpected, irrelevant objects.
So it's an active process.
Very active. No matter how salient or obvious they might seem in retrospect, if they don't match the criteria of what you were actively looking for, they are dropped from conscious perception.
That is wild.
It is a feature of our neural architecture, designed to keep us focused. It is not a bug.
Okay, I understand how that works in a controlled laboratory with a videotape, but let's take this out of the lab and look at a real-world scenario where this exact mechanism had devastating, life-altering consequences.
Kenny Conley case.
Yes. This is a story from the book that absolutely floored me. It was January 1995 in Boston. The police get a radio call erroneously stating that a cop has been shot.
Which is the highest stress call imaginable.
Right. As you can imagine, this sparks a massive, chaotic, high-speed, adrenaline-fueled chase involving dozens of officers. Eventually, the suspect's car crashes in a cul-de-sac.
Right.
The suspects bail out and run. One suspect, a man named Smut Brown, scales a chain-link fence.
Now, right behind him is a plainclothes anti-gang officer named Michael Cox.
Okay.
Cox is black. He's working undercover, so he's wearing jeans and a hoodie. He grabs Brown at the top of the fence, but Brown manages to drop to the other side.
So he's pursuing him?
Yes, but as Cox prepares to climb over to pursue him, he is struck from behind with a blunt object. Another officer arriving on the scene had mistaken Cox for one of the fleeing suspects.
Oh, God.
What follows is a brutal, vicious beating. Several officers kick and beat Cox as he lies on the ground until someone finally realizes he's a cop, yells out, and they all flee into the night, leaving him unconscious and bleeding.
Just a horrific event. Now, enter Officer Kenny Conley. Conley was in one of the first cruisers on the scene. He sees the suspect, Smut Brown, go over the fence.
Right.
Conley runs to the fence, climbs over it, chases Brown for a mile, and single-handedly apprehends him. But here's the critical, defining detail of this entire case.
The proximity.
Yes. To get over that fence, Conley had to run right past the exact spot where his fellow officer, Michael Cox, was being brutally beaten by multiple men.
Right past it.
When Conley is later brought before a grand jury and asked to testify about the beating, he says he didn't see anything. He didn't see the plainclothes officer. He didn't see the assault. He just saw the suspect he was chasing.
And you can imagine the reaction. The prosecutors, the jury, the public, and the journalists covering the case all universally concluded that Conley was lying.
They assumed the blue wall of silence.
Exactly. They assumed he was protecting his fellow officers. Because the justice system operates on the exact illusion of attention we are talking about.
Right. Their logic makes intuitive sense to a normal person.
The logic the prosecution used was simple, intuitive, and entirely wrong. They said if he was looking right at it and he ran right past it, he must have seen it. Therefore, to say he didn't see it is perjury.
And he went to prison.
He was actually convicted of perjury and obstruction of justice, fired from the police force, and sentenced to nearly 3 years in prison.
Okay, let's unpack this. Is human attention less like a wide-angle camera lens that captures everything in the frame passively, and more like a high-powered spotlight in a pitch-black theater?
I like that analogy.
We mistakenly believe the whole theater is brightly lit simply because wherever we happen to look, the spotlight is already there. But if something happens outside that beam, even if it's a massive, violent brawl, we are completely in the dark.
It's a good analogy, but it actually falls a bit short of how intense this biological process is.
How so?
Because with a spotlight, the area outside the beam is just passively dark. In the brain, the area outside the beam of attention is actively suppressed. Your brain is spending metabolic energy to make sure you don't process the distractions.
Wow, so it's an active deletion.
Yes. And let's look at Conley's specific situation. He was operating a very narrow, highly focused spotlight. He testified to having tunnel vision on the fleeing murder suspect.
His primary task was intense.
Incredibly demanding and high stakes. He's chasing a potentially armed man in the dark. Under those conditions, if we apply the science of inattentional blindness, it is entirely scientifically plausible that Conley ran right past the beating.
Even if he looked at it.
Yes. He perhaps even fixated his eyes on the brawl for a fraction of a second and never consciously perceived it. The justice system suppressed the ambiguity of human perception.
They mistook subjective certainty for objective biological reliability.
Exactly. The jury thought, I know what I would have seen if I were there.
Which is terrifying because it means the legal system is literally punishing people for the biological limits of their own brains.
It demands an impossible standard.
The system demands that humans operate like security cameras, and when we operate like humans, we get thrown in jail for perjury.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows how institutions fundamentally fail when they misunderstand human cognition. They demand a level of awareness that simply does not exist in the human species.
Did the authors get involved in his case?
Chabris and Simons actually testified or consulted on Conley's behalf later during the appeals process, explaining this exact science. But it's an incredibly hard sell to a jury.
Because it goes against common sense.
Exactly. Accepting inattentional blindness means accepting that our own minds are deceiving us every single day.
So we've established that the spotlight of attention is narrow and that anything outside of it gets actively suppressed. But what exactly controls where that spotlight points in the first place?
That is the key question.
Like if I'm driving down the street, I'm not doing a math problem or counting basketball passes. My eyes are just open. What determines what gets processed and what gets filtered out?
That brings us to the psychological concept of expectations. What guides that spotlight, what sets the parameters for the filter, are our internal mental templates of what we expect to encounter.
So the brain is predicting.
Yes, the brain uses a process called top-down processing. It doesn't build a picture of the world from scratch every millisecond. It uses past experience to predict what should be there.
And it only looks for things that match.
It actively looks for things that confirm or violate that specific prediction. And when our expectations mismatch reality in high-speed, high-stakes environments, the results are frequently lethal.
Let's talk about traffic accidents then, specifically motorcycles, because this blew my mind.
This is a classic example.
In 2006, Ben Roethlisberger, the NFL quarterback, was riding his motorcycle in Pittsburgh. A car driven by a woman with a near-perfect driving record was coming the opposite way.
She was just a normal driver.
Right. She had a green light, she went to turn left across his lane, and she pulled right into his path. Roethlisberger crashed into her windshield and was severely injured.
And what did she say afterward?
She said what almost every driver in these situations says. She said, I looked right there, and he came out of nowhere. I never saw him.
And motorcyclists often feel, understandably, like drivers are deliberately ignoring them or just being reckless. You hear it all the time. She looked right at me and pulled out anyway.
But it's not malice.
No, this is a classic psychological phenomenon known as a looked but failed to see error. When a driver approaches an intersection to make a left turn, their brain is scanning the oncoming lane.
But not scanning for everything?
Exactly. It isn't scanning for everything. It is scanning for a specific pattern. The shape, size, horizontal width, and motion profile of cars, because cars are what they expect to see.
And a motorcycle violates that expectation.
It doesn't fit the template. So the brain's filter treats it as irrelevant visual noise and drops it, exactly like the subjects filtered out the black gorilla.
And this isn't just an issue on the roads with average commuters. This expectation filter happens with highly trained professionals operating multi-million-dollar equipment.
The submarine case.
Yes, in 2001, the USS Greenville, a massive nuclear submarine, was demonstrating an emergency surfacing maneuver.
Right.
The commander, Scott Waddell, looked through the periscope, scanned the surface of the ocean, saw absolutely nothing, and ordered the sub to blow its ballast tanks.
And then disaster struck.
The submarine breached the surface directly underneath a Japanese fishing vessel, the Ehime Maru, sinking it and killing 9 people.
A modern nuclear submarine has state-of-the-art sonar, and the commander physically looked through the periscope directly at the massive fishing vessel. The weather was clear, but he didn't see it.
Because he wasn't expecting it.
As he later admitted during the inquiry, he wasn't looking for it, and he didn't expect a civilian ship to be right on top of him in that specific patch of ocean.
Submarines almost never surface directly underneath other ships.
It was a total anomaly. His expectations dictated his perception. He looked at a ship and perceived empty water.
So, if expectation is the core problem, the intuitive solution seems obvious. Just make the unexpected thing more visible, right?
That's what most safety campaigns try to do.
Tell motorcyclists to wear bright neon yellow vests. Dress them like neon gorillas so the brain can't possibly ignore them. But the researchers tested this distinctiveness theory, didn't they?
Yes, and this is where the science gets really counterintuitive and why public safety campaigns often fail. They created a computerized version of the gorilla experiment where subjects tracked moving white letters on a screen and ignored black letters.
Okay, so same basic setup.
But instead of a gorilla, a bright red cross unexpectedly drifted across the screen for several seconds. Now keep in mind, the red cross was the only colored object on the entire screen.
So it was highly distinctive.
It should have popped out immediately, but 30% of the participants still completely missed it.
30%. Almost a third of people didn't see a bright red cross on a black and white screen.
Because distinctiveness does not override expectation. If you are devoting your cognitive resources to scanning for moving white letters, a bright red cross is just as irrelevant to your primary task as a black letter.
The brain just categorizes it as not a white letter.
And suppresses it. Wearing bright clothing might help a driver who is already actively looking for a motorcycle spot you a fraction of a second faster, but it will not magically force a driver who is only scanning for cars to suddenly perceive you.
You are still outside their template of expectation.
Exactly.
Okay, so if making things brighter or more distinctive doesn't solve the problem, what about using technology to help us see better?
Like digital overlays.
Right. If our organic filter is flawed, let's use a digital overlay. Let's talk about head-up displays, or HUDs. These project instrument readings like speed, altitude, and trajectory directly onto the windshield or a glass screen in front of your face.
So you don't have to look down at the dashboard.
It seems like a brilliant idea. Keep your eyes pointed exactly where the danger is.
It seems brilliant until you test it against the actual biological limits of human attention. NASA ran a simulator study with highly experienced commercial pilots to see how effective HUDs were.
And what happened?
They had them practice landing a Boeing 727 using a head-up display. The pilots loved it. It felt intuitive. But on one of the final simulator runs, the researchers threw in a surprise.
A deadly surprise.
As the plane broke through the clouds and approached the runway, there was a massive passenger jet parked directly on the tarmac, right in their landing path.
And some of the pilots flew their simulator straight through the park jet.
Exactly. And the reason why is the ultimate proof of how inattentional blindness works. The HUD kept their eyes pointing forward, physically aligned with the real world.
But their attention was somewhere else.
Right. It focused their attention strictly on the projected digital instrument data, the expected primary task of monitoring their descent rate, their airspeed, and their alignment.
So they were basically blind to the outside world.
Because their attentional spotlight was completely consumed by interpreting the HUD data, they experienced inattentional blindness to the physical runway right behind the glass. They were looking through a giant parked airplane to read a digital number.
So the technology intended to improve their situational awareness actually severely impaired their ability to notice a catastrophic anomaly.
It made them worse at noticing the unexpected.
Which brings us perfectly to an everyday example that drives me absolutely insane: the cell phone epidemic.
Oh, this is a huge one.
Every single time I drive on the highway, I see someone drifting into another lane or braking late, and when I look over, they are talking on their phone.
Without fail.
And the legislative response to this obvious danger has been to pass hands-free laws. We mandate that you put the phone on a dashboard mount or connect it to your car's Bluetooth.
Assuming that if your hands are on the 10 and 2 position, you are safe.
Exactly. Assuming that if your eyes are looking through the windshield, you are fine.
This is perhaps the most dangerous widespread application of the illusion of attention in our modern world.
How so?
The problem with talking on a cell phone while driving has absolutely nothing to do with your hands. The motor task of holding a 3-ounce piece of plastic to your ear is trivial.
So the hands-free laws miss the point.
Entirely. The impairment comes entirely from the cognitive load of the conversation.
Here's where it gets really interesting and a bit infuriating. We pass laws mandating hands-free devices, thinking we are solving the problem. Or are our institutions actually actively legislating us into greater danger by falsely validating the illusion of attention?
That is a great way to put it.
By telling people, hey, as long as it's on Bluetooth, it's legal, therefore it's safe. Are we just giving them a false sense of security while they are just as cognitively impaired?
Without a doubt, we are institutionally endorsing cognitive impairment. Studies consistently show that the driving impairment caused by a cell phone conversation, whether it is handheld or hands-free via Bluetooth, is comparable to driving with a blood alcohol level at the legal limit of 0.08.
That is terrifying.
When you are on a phone, you react more slowly to brake lights, you miss stop signs, and your overall visual awareness shrinks. Your peripheral vision literally narrows.
Just from talking?
Yes.
Yes.
Because you are draining the limited battery of your attentional resources to generate the mental imagery and track the complex logic of a remote conversation.
So your brain is picturing the other person.
Your brain is trying to picture what the person on the other end is saying. And that visualization process steals processing power from the visual cortex that should be monitoring the road.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. If I'm driving down the road and talking to you sitting in the passenger seat, we're having a complex conversation. Is that just as dangerous? Should we ban talking to passengers?
It's a great question, and it's the first thing people ask when they hear this data. But the answer is no. Talking to a passenger is significantly safer.
Why is that?
It's rooted in social psychology and shared awareness. First, a passenger shares your physical environment. If a child suddenly runs into the street, the passenger might gasp, point, or brace themselves.
So they act as an active second set of eyes?
Yes, and a warning system. But more importantly, there's a shared social context. If the traffic suddenly gets chaotic or it starts pouring rain, you can stop talking mid-sentence to navigate the danger.
And the passenger doesn't get mad.
Exactly. Your passenger understands exactly why you stopped. They can see the danger too. But if you are on a cell phone and suddenly go silent because a truck swerved into your lane, the person on the other end says, "Hello, are you there? Did I lose you?"
Oh, right. There's pressure to keep talking.
There is an immense subconscious social pressure to maintain the flow of a remote cell phone conversation, which forces you to allocate cognitive resources away from the road precisely when you need them most.
So the overarching illusion here is that we think looking is the exact same thing as seeing. We think because our eyes are physically pointed at the windshield, our brain is faithfully recording and processing the information.
And that biological failure to distinguish between looking and seeing is what makes distracted driving so lethal. We overestimate our capacity.
Now, I can hear a listener thinking right now, okay, sure, the average person driving to work might miss a motorcycle, or a distracted college student might miss a gorilla.
Right.
But surely, highly trained professionals, experts who have spent decades honing their craft and their observational skills, are immune to this, right? Expertise has to count for something.
It's a comforting thought. We want to believe our doctors, pilots, and experts are infallible.
But they aren't.
No, because it completely mischaracterizes what expertise actually is. Expertise does not give you an infinite capacity for attention. It does not upgrade your brain's hardware.
So what does it do?
It simply refines your expectations. It makes your templates much more precise.
Let's illustrate this with an incredible social experiment orchestrated by the Washington Post. They took Joshua Bell, one of the greatest classical violinists alive.
A true virtuoso.
A guy who routinely sells out massive concert halls where tickets cost hundreds of dollars, and they put him in a gritty Washington, D.C. subway station, L'Enfant Plaza, during the morning rush hour.
Just buskin'.
He is wearing a baseball cap, dressed like a normal guy, playing a Stradivarius violin worth $3 million. He plays a 45-minute set of some of the most complex, beautiful music ever written by Bach.
And over 1,000 people walk past him.
Over 1,000. Do you know how many stopped to really listen?
7.
Yeah.
7 people out of over 1,000. And he made a grand total of $32.17 in his open violin case.
The journalist who wrote the story, Gene Weingarten, actually won a Pulitzer Prize for it. And he originally framed this as a tragic commentary on modern society.
He thought it was a cultural feeling.
He argued that we are so rushed, so stressed, and so consumer-driven that we have lost the ability to appreciate true beauty and art when it's right in front of us. He basically said we are culturally broken.
And what's fascinating here, from a cognitive perspective, is that the journalist completely fell for the illusion of attention.
How so?
He assumed that a stimulus as objectively beautiful and extraordinary as Joshua Bell's playing would automatically capture the attention of anyone within earshot.
But the commuters were busy.
They were engaged in a highly demanding primary task, navigating a crowded, noisy subterranean environment to get to work on time. They were dodging other people, checking the train schedules, listening for announcements.
They weren't expecting a private concert.
They weren't expecting to hear a virtuoso violinist next to the escalator. Therefore, they suffered from what we could call inattentional deafness.
Their brains literally filtered the music out as background noise because it wasn't relevant to their immediate goal of catching the Red Line train.
Exactly. If you want to test whether people appreciate beauty, you can't test them when their attentional resources are fully depleted by a competing spatial and temporal task.
It's not about lacking appreciation.
Right. The commuters didn't lack aesthetic appreciation. They lacked available attention. The context dictates the perception.
But let's look at experts doing their actual jobs where the context is right. Consider radiologists.
This is a scary example.
These are doctors with over a decade of intensive training, specifically in looking at complex medical images to find tiny anomalies. A study highlighted in the book looked at a case where a patient had a central line inserted into her vein, and the doctor accidentally left a metal guide wire inside her body.
A huge mistake.
The patient subsequently developed breathing issues, and multiple chest x-rays and CT scans were taken over several days.
And the attending emergency room doctor and the highly trained radiologist completely missed the metal wire, clearly visible on the x-rays.
They completely missed it.
They diagnosed the lung issue, but missed a piece of surgical equipment sitting in her chest.
How does an expert miss a wire inside a human heart?
Because of how their expertise is structurally organized in the brain. Radiologists are trained to look for specific pathological patterns.
Like what?
The hazy shadow of a tumor, the jagged line of a hairline fracture, the fluid buildup of a pulmonary embolism. When they look at an x-ray of a patient presenting with breathing difficulty, their expectation is sharply tuned to find a respiratory illness.
So they use a specific template.
They are scanning the image with a very specific, highly refined template. A surgical guide wire does not fit the template of a respiratory illness.
So they just filter it out.
Therefore, even though their eyes trace over the bright white line of the wire on the film, their brain filters it out as an irrelevant artifact.
So expertise is actually a double-edged sword. It makes you incredibly efficient and accurate at finding what you expect to find, but it creates massive, predictable blind spots for anything outside your specialized template.
Precisely. You become blind to the unexpected because of your expertise, not in spite of it.
But the hospital doesn't see it that way.
The medical system operates on the illusion that an expert's gaze acts like a flawless, comprehensive scanner. If the radiologist clears the x-ray, the institution assumes there is nothing anomalous there at all.
They trust the confidence.
They prefer expertise that sounds conclusive and comprehensive, ignoring the biological reality that highly trained focus inherently requires ignoring almost everything else.
So we've spent all this time seeing how our attention acts as an aggressive, real-time filter, tossing out massive amounts of visual and auditory information before it ever reaches our conscious awareness.
Right.
If my brain is throwing away half the visual world in real time just to keep me functioning, what is it doing to the stuff it actually decides to save? What happens when we try to look backward and access a memory?
Oh, this is where it gets really messy.
We like to think of memory as a video recorder. You hit record, it saves to a hard drive, and when you want to remember, you hit play, and the scene unfolds exactly as it happened.
That is the illusion of memory. If our attention is already filtering the present down to a fraction of reality, our memory systems are left with only fragments to store.
So it's not a playback mechanism.
Not at all. Memory is an active, reconstructive process. Every single time we remember something, our brain has to stitch together a coherent reality from a few isolated details, filling in the massive gaps with logic, assumptions, and our current beliefs about what must have happened.
Let's play a quick mental game with the listener to prove this. I'm going to read a list of words. Listen closely. Ready?
For it.
Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy. Okay, now obviously you can't write these down right now, but just think for a second. Was the word sleep on that list?
This is based on the famous Diess-Roediger-McDermott, or DRM, word list paradigm in psychology.
And what happens?
If we rigorously test people on this, roughly 40% of them will swear with absolute certainty that they heard the word sleep. They will have a vivid, conscious recollection of hearing your voice say it.
But I never said it.
You never said it. But let's look at the mechanism of why this happens. It's about how the brain stores data. All the words you did say were conceptually associated with sleep.
So the brain catches the vibe.
Exactly. As the listener processed the list, their brain didn't record a verbatim audio file. Instead, it activated a semantic network, a web of interconnected concepts. It extracted the gist or the meaning of the list, which is things related to sleep.
And then it reconstructs it later.
When asked to recall the list moments later, the brain reconstructs the memory based on that central theme, and it inserts the word sleep because it logically belongs there. It's highly activated in the network.
It prioritizes the meaning over the details.
The brain prioritizes meaning over precise details because meaning is more useful for survival.
And if our brains invent words on a simple 15-word list we heard 10 seconds ago, imagine what they do with complex, highly emotional, real-world events that happened years ago.
It gets so much worse.
Let's look at the infamous confrontation between legendary, notoriously fiery college basketball coach Bobby Knight and his player, Neil Reed.
A huge scandal.
Years after the fact, Reed went public, claiming that during a practice, Knight violently attacked him. Reed's memory was incredibly vivid. He remembered Knight coming at him, grabbing him by the throat with two hands, choking him for several seconds.
And he remembered a rescue. Right.
Yes, until the assistant coaches rushed in and physically pulled Knight off of him to save him.
And Coach Knight's memory of the event was entirely different. He vaguely remembered making a physical correction, perhaps grabbing Reed by the back of the neck to quickly move him to a spot on the floor.
Which he thought was normal.
Right, which Knight considered a routine, unremarkable part of old-school coaching. He emphatically, passionately denied choking him. We have two completely contradictory memories of the exact same event.
Now, normally this would just be a classic he said, she said scenario. But what makes this case unique and scientifically invaluable is that a videotape of the practice eventually surfaced.
We actually get to see the objective ground truth.
And the video proves that both of their memories were heavily distorted.
The video shows Knight approaching Reed in anger, grabbing him by the front of the neck with one hand and pushing him backward. It was indeed a brief, violent, totally inappropriate choke.
So Knight's memory of a gentle correction was wrong.
Right. But crucially, nobody stepped in. The assistant coaches just stood there and watched. Nobody pulled Knight away. So Reed's memory of a dramatic rescue was also wrong.
So Knight minimized the event in his memory to fit his internal narrative of being a tough but standard, rule-abiding coach. But Reed embellished the event. He added a dramatic rescue squad that never happened. Why would he invent that?
Because Reed was a young kid, and being assaulted by his powerful head coach was a deeply traumatic, highly salient event. His brain stored the gist of the memory. I was attacked, I was helpless, and it was a major, chaotic conflict.
And over time, it mutated.
Over time, as he recalled and reconstructed the memory, his brain filled in details that made narrative sense for a major conflict like other adults intervening to break up a fight.
The memory morphed to fit the emotion.
Exactly. The memory morphed to fit the heavy emotional weight he assigned to it. And Reed was genuinely shocked when he saw the tape. He wasn't deliberately lying to the press. His brain had simply seamlessly rewritten the script.
This reconstructive rewriting happens even in real time, right in front of our eyes, which is wild. Talk about the door experiment.
This is one of the most brilliant and hilarious experiments in modern psychology, conducted by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin.
How does it work?
An experimenter approaches a random pedestrian on a college campus and asks for directions, holding a physical map. While they are talking, two workers carrying a large wooden door walk right between the experimenter and the pedestrian,
Which blocks their view for a second.
temporarily blocking their view of each other for maybe 2 seconds.
And while the door is blocking the view, the first experimenter ducks away behind the door, and a completely different person takes their place.
Right.
They drop the map, the new person picks it up. Different claws, different height, different voice, different hair color. The door passes, and the new experimenter just continues the conversation, acting like nothing happened.
And 50% of the pedestrians do not notice that they are talking to a completely different human being.
50%.
This is known as change blindness. We assume we have a continuous, detailed, high-resolution visual representation of the person standing 2 feet in front of us.
But we don't.
In reality, unless we are actively focusing on their specific facial features, we only encode a rough semantic gist, a young college student asking for directions.
So when they swap?
When the person is swapped out, the new person still fits that broad gist, so the brain simply fails to notice the massive visual discrepancy. It assumes continuity.
It's mind-blowing to think about how much of our reality is just assumed continuity. But what about the really big emotional memories? The ones that feel burned into our brains?
Like flashbulb memories.
Yes, I know exactly where I was the day the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, or on 9/11. Psychologists call these flashbulb memories because it feels like a camera flash went off, freezing every sensory detail in high resolution forever.
They certainly feel that way. The problem is when cognitive psychologists actually rigorously test flashbulb memories, they find massive, sweeping distortions.
How do they test them?
By asking people to write down details the day after an event and then asking them again a year or two later, people will confidently remember being in a completely different location, hearing the news from a different person, or reacting in a different way.
So they're just as flawed as normal memories.
The data is clear. The factual accuracy of flashbulb memories degrades at the exact same rate as everyday, mundane memories, like what you had for breakfast last Tuesday.
But they feel so real.
Because the only difference is that our confidence in flashbulb memories remains incredibly high. We confuse the vividness and the emotional intensity of the memory with its historical accuracy.
And this brings us to a crucial point about how this illusion impacts public life and how we judge public figures. The source material for this deep dive uses 2 prominent historical examples of false memories from political figures.
Yes, and we need to be careful here.
Right. Before we get into these next 2 examples, I want to be extremely clear here for our listeners. We are absolutely not taking any political sides here, and we are not endorsing or condemning any political viewpoints or campaigns.
Absolutely not.
We are purely looking at this through the lens of cognitive psychology. We are simply, impartially reporting these examples exactly as they're presented in the book to illustrate how the human brain naturally and unconsciously distorts emotional memories, regardless of who you are.
That is an important caveat. The brain's architecture doesn't care about political affiliation.
Nope. So what is the first example?
The first example the book uses involves President George W. Bush. On at least 2 public occasions, President Bush recalled the morning of September 11th, stating that he was sitting outside a classroom in Florida, waiting to go in, when he saw the first plane hit the World Trade Center on a television screen.
He remembered thinking, there's one terrible pilot.
Yes, but structurally, chronologically, that is factually impossible. There was no video footage of the first plane crash broadcast on live television until long after that morning.
So he couldn't have seen it live.
Right. Bush saw the live footage of the second plane crash later, and his chief of staff, Andrew Card, whispered the news about the attacks in his ear while he was sitting inside the classroom.
So his brain combined the events.
Exactly. His brain had taken isolated, intense fragments of his experience that morning, hearing about the first plane, seeing the footage of the second plane later, the emotional shock of the day, his internal monologue about a terrible pilot, and stitched them together into a plausible but historically inaccurate, coherent narrative.
So it wasn't a lie.
It wasn't a malicious, calculated lie. It was a textbook memory conflation.
Ah!
Yet conspiracy theorists use this very normal memory lapse to argue he had prior knowledge of the attacks and slipped up.
Wow. And the second example from the book involves Hillary Clinton during the 2008 presidential campaign. She vividly recounted a 1996 diplomatic trip to Bosnia, stating in a speech, "I remember landing under sniper fire."
Right.
She said there was supposed to be some kind of a greeting ceremony at the airport, but instead we just ran with our heads down to get into the vehicles to get to our base.
But shortly after she said that, news footage of the event surfaced, showing a completely calm arrival.
No sniper.
There was no sniper fire, no running for cover. She walked calmly across the tarmac and participated in a standard greeting ceremony, smiling with an 8-year-old girl.
Again, her political opponents instantly seized on this, accusing her of being a pathological liar, deliberately trying to manufacture foreign policy credentials out of thin air.
But from the perspective of cognitive psychology, knowing what we know about reconstructive memory, it is entirely plausible, even likely, that this was an unconscious distortion.
Because it was a stressful situation.
She was visiting an active war zone. She likely felt immense internal stress and anxiety leading up to the landing. Over the years, as she recalled the event, her brain took the gist of the experience. I was in a dangerous place and felt threatened.
And it reconstructed the details to match.
Yes, it reconstructed the specific visual details to match that emotional intensity. Her brain literally invented sniper fire to justify the internal narrative of danger. It is the exact same mechanism as Neil Reed inventing assistant coaches pulling Bobby Knight away. The emotion dictates the reconstructed facts.
So what does this all mean? If our memories are constantly being rewritten without our permission to fit a coherent narrative, is the continuity of our very identity just a compelling illusion? Are we just walking storytellers who believe our own fiction?
It's a profound, almost existential question that philosophers and neuroscientists wrestle with.
It's heavy.
Our identity is constructed from our personal history. And if that history is inherently malleable, then our sense of self is perhaps much more fluid than we realize.
But there is a practical danger, too.
Yes, the more immediate practical danger is that because our false memories feel so incredibly vivid and emotionally true, they breed an unshakable yet entirely unwarranted confidence. And that confidence becomes toxic when it interacts with complex systems that assume confidence equals competence.
Which perfectly transitions us into the incentive architecture of certainty. Because we misjudge our memory and our attention, we end up drastically misjudging our own knowledge and competence.
And this illusion of confidence is everywhere.
Everywhere. Take the World Open Chess Tournament in Philadelphia. Chess is a unique environment to study this because players have objective, mathematically calculated ELO ratings based on wins and losses.
There's no ambiguity.
None. There is no ambiguity about how good you are. If your rating is 1500, you are objectively worse than someone rated 1800. It's math.
The researchers surveyed players at this tournament and asked them to estimate their true underlying chess ability. Not how they were playing that day, but their true, deep potential.
And what did they say?
Almost universally, the players estimated their true ability to be about 100 points higher than their actual official rating. They all thought they were fundamentally better than the objective data definitively proved them to be.
So they just ignored the data.
They believed their rating was a temporary fluke, but their high estimation was the truth.
My favorite darkly humorous example of this kind of misplaced confidence is the story of MacArthur Wheeler. He was a guy who decided to rob 2 banks in Pittsburgh in broad daylight.
Oh, this story's unbelievable.
He didn't wear a ski mask, he didn't wear pantyhose over his head, he just walked in, robbed the banks, and smiled at the security cameras. When the police inevitably arrested him hours later because his face was all over the news, he was completely baffled.
He literally couldn't understand how they taught him.
He said, "But I wore the juice."
He had read somewhere that lemon juice could be used as an invisible ink to write secret messages. So he hypothesized that if he covered his face in lemon juice, his face would become invisible to electronic security cameras.
It's absurd. It sounds like a cartoon. But it perfectly illustrates a well-documented psychological phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes, named after David Dunning and Justin Kruger. The underlying truth here is that unskilled people lack the very expertise required to recognize their own incompetence.
It's a double burden.
It is. You need a certain baseline level of knowledge about chemistry, optics, and security systems to realize that rubbing citrus on your face doesn't make you invisible. Without that knowledge, Wheeler lacked the metacognitive tools to evaluate his own plan.
So he was blissfully confident.
Blissfully, catastrophically confident in it. If your listener right now think you are an above-average driver, statistically, many of you are wrong. It's uncomfortable to realize that we all might be the MacArthur Wheeler of our own lives in some specific area of knowledge.
But the illusion of confidence goes from a quirky personal failing to a systemic catastrophe when it infects the legal system. Let's look at how juries evaluate eyewitnesses.
This is where it gets incredibly tragic.
If a witness takes the stand, sobbing, looks the defendant in the eye and says, "I am 100% certain that is the man who attacked me," a jury will almost always convict based on that confidence alone.
And we saw the horrifying consequences of this in the case of Jennifer Thompson.
Oh.
She was brutally assaulted in her home, and she actively tried to memorize her attacker's face during the assault so she could catch him.
So she was paying close attention.
Later, she confidently identified a man named Ronald Cotton as her attacker in a police lineup. And again in court, she was absolutely fiercely certain.
But she was wrong.
Cotton spent over a decade in prison before modern DNA evidence proved he was completely innocent, and another man who looked somewhat similar had committed the crime.
How does that happen? How is she so certain if he's the wrong guy?
Because the legal system rewards subjective certainty, and it misunderstands memory. We instinctively trust a confident witness because we incorrectly assume that confidence correlates with memory accuracy. We think, if she wasn't sure, she wouldn't say it.
But memory is reconstructive.
Exactly. When Thompson was shown a photo lineup by police, she spent a long time looking at Ronald Cotton's photo, trying to decide if it was him. In doing so, her brain inadvertently replaced the fading traumatic memory of her actual attacker with the clear, static image of Ronald Cotton's face.
Oh, wow. So the photo became the memory.
By the time she got to court, she was remembering Cotton's face, but she was remembering it from the photograph, not from the crime scene. Her confidence was a product of the vividness of the newly reconstructed memory, not its historical truth. The system's reliance on confidence destroyed an innocent man's life.
And we are just as wildly overconfident in our general knowledge as we are in our memories. Let me ask you, the listener, a serious question. Do you know how a toilet works? Or a bicycle?
Let's think about it.
If I gave you a piece of paper right now, could you explain it?
Most people will confidently nod and say yes. But cognitive scientists at Yale tested this phenomenon, which they call the illusion of explanatory depth.
How did they test it?
They asked people to rate their understanding of everyday devices, like toilets, zippers, and cylinder locks, on a scale of 1 to 7. Predictably, people rated themselves highly. They felt confident. Then, the researchers asked them to actually draw a working diagram of a bicycle or write a detailed step-by-step causal explanation of how a toilet flushes.
And people failed miserably. They drew bicycles with the chain connecting both the front and back wheels, which means the bike literally couldn't turn.
It wouldn't move at all.
They had absolutely no idea how the float valve in a toilet tank regulates water pressure.
In the middle of the test, people suddenly realized they had vastly overestimated themselves. They had mistaken familiarity for deep understanding. Because we use toilets and bicycles every day without having to think about their mechanics, we develop a fluency with them.
We know how to operate them, not how they work.
We think we understand how they work, but we only really understand how to operate them. We know we push the lever and water goes down. We don't know the physics of the siphon effect.
Multiply that illusion of explanatory depth across the entire global economy. This isn't just about bicycles. Let's connect this to the 2008 global financial collapse.
This is where the illusion becomes globally destructive. Leading up to the crash, financial analysts, investment bankers, and rating agencies were dealing with incredibly complex financial instruments, like collateralized debt obligations or CDOs, filled with subprime mortgages.
Which are way more complicated than a zipper.
Vastly more complex. But the analysts mistook their fluency in the financial jargon. Their ability to throw around acronyms, build spreadsheets based on historical data, and talk smoothly in meetings for an actual deep understanding of the systemic causal risks involved.
They mistook familiarity with the surface features for an understanding of the underlying mechanics. They knew how to sell a CDO, but they didn't know what would happen if the housing market dropped by 10%.
Exactly. And furthermore, corporate institutions actively suppress ambiguity. They demand confidence. A junior analyst who stands up in a meeting and says, "I don't really understand how this derivative works in an unprecedented stress scenario," they get fired.
And the confident ones get promoted.
A CEO who projects absolute, unwavering certainty gets a massive bonus. We also assume that putting a bunch of smart people in a room leads to better decisions.
Does it?
No. Group deliberation often just increases a group's collective confidence without improving its actual accuracy. The members reinforce each other's flawed assumptions. Confidence acts as a socially soothing but fundamentally dangerous signal that everything is under control right up until the system spectacularly collapses.
So when our illusion of knowledge fails and we are suddenly confronted with randomness, chaos, or a profound lack of understanding, our brains tend to panic. We hate feeling out of control.
We despise it.
So to regain a sense of order, we aggressively invent patterns and causes that simply don't exist.
The human brain is, at its core, a hyperactive pattern-matching engine. From an evolutionary perspective, it made sense. It was much better to mistake a shadow in the grass for a lion and run away than to mistake a real lion for a shadow and get eaten.
The cost of a false positive is low.
Yes, the cost of a false positive is low. The cost of a false negative is death. But in the complex, data-rich modern world, this hyperactive engine misfires constantly.
This is why someone sees the face of the Virgin Mary burned into a piece of grilled cheese sandwich and sells it for thousands of dollars on eBay.
Right, Dolia?
Our visual system is so exquisitely tuned to recognize human faces that it forcefully imposes the pattern of a face onto random burn marks on bread. It's called pareidolia.
Seeing faces in toast is harmless. But the danger arises when we apply this aggressive pattern matching to complex social or medical data. We infer causal relationships from mere coincidences.
Like vaccines.
If event A happens before event B, we naturally assume A caused B. This is exactly the cognitive trap that leads people to fiercely infer that vaccines cause autism, simply because the diagnosis of autism often chronologically follows the administration of early childhood vaccines.
The timeline fools us.
The brain creates a false but emotionally satisfying narrative of causality out of simple chronological proximity. It desperately wants an explanation for a frightening diagnosis.
And when we aren't inventing patterns, we are clinging desperately to what the authors call the illusion of potential. We want to believe there are shortcuts to mastery. Have you heard of the Mozart effect?
Yes, the incredibly pervasive idea that simply playing classical music for infants will magically increase their IQ and make them smarter. It became such a phenomenon that a governor in Georgia actually diverted state funds to distribute classical music CDs to every newborn in the state.
But the original study behind that craze only showed a tiny, temporary 15-minute boost in spatial reasoning in college students, not babies.
And no one could successfully replicate it.
Yet it became a global, multi-million-dollar industry. Or what about James Vickery's famous claim in the 1950s that flashing the words "drink Coca-Cola for a fraction of a second" during a movie subliminally forced audiences to march out and buy more soda?
Vickery later admitted he completely fabricated the data for that study. Subliminal advertising in that sense simply doesn't work. But the myth persists decades later. People still worry about subliminal messages in ads.
Why do we want to believe this stuff so badly?
Because we fundamentally want to believe that there are hidden reserves of brain power, secret back doors to the mind that can be unlocked with minimal effort. We vastly prefer the fantasy of untapped potential over the hard, uncomfortable reality of our hardwired cognitive limits.
Are we basically treating our brains like smartphones, believing there's just a secret app we haven't downloaded yet that will magically double our battery life, when the reality is we just have a small battery and we need to manage our power better?
That is exactly it. We want a simple software update to fix a fundamental hardware limitation. We want to believe we can learn to multitask or learn to have a photographic memory. But there is no secret app. Our attention, our memory, and our cognitive capacity are structurally, biologically limited.
Let's bring this deep dive full circle. The broader issue we've uncovered today is not just that you or I might occasionally miss a gorilla in a video, or forget where we put our keys, or think we know how a zipper works when we don't.
Those are individual quirks.
Right.
The crisis, the real systemic danger, is that modern institutions are built on unrealistic assumptions about what human beings can actually perceive, remember, and understand.
It's built into the system.
Innocent people are implicated and imprisoned by confident but mistaken witnesses. Dangerous transportation environments and laws are designed around deadly myths about our ability to multitask.
And it distorts society.
And public discourse is constantly distorted by the illusion of knowledge, where politicians, pundits, and voters project absolute certainty about complex global systems they can barely explain. The crisis is the gap between how perception feels and how perception works.
So what do we do with this information? We cannot train away inattentional blindness. You can't mental gymnast your way out of these evolutionary illusions. The only real solution is restructuring our environment to account for our limitations.
We have to design around the flaws.
Put the cell phone in the trunk of the car so you aren't tempted by the subconscious social pressure to answer it. When making a critical business or life decision, actively seek out independent evaluations rather than relying on group consensus to avoid a false sense of collective confidence.
And be skeptical.
And most importantly, approach your own certainty and the certainty of those in power with heavy, heavy skepticism.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, extending this into the future. We are currently rushing to build artificial intelligence and massive autonomous systems, self-driving cars, predictive policing algorithms, automated financial trading bots,
Right.
But we are training these models on massive data sets of human behavior, human decisions, and human reporting. If our entire subjective reality is fundamentally filtered through these invisible illusions of attention, reconstructive memory, and unwarranted confidence,
Mm.
are we inadvertently hard-coding our own cognitive blind spots into the very machines we hope will save us?
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
It's all about seeing the systems.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
We really appreciate the support.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
It's a great little video.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Remember, that bright spotlight of your attention might be illuminating the stage, but don't forget about the dark theater all around it. Stay curious.